Mr. President, the Republican leader came here yesterday, came here again this morning, talking about Zika. Mr. President, understand how the House of Representatives works, and stunningly, Republicans over here accept what they do in the House. Representatives, they have what is called the Hastert rule, named after a congressman from Illinois who was the Speaker of the House for a number of years, and he created what was called the Hastert rule. And what that was is that you had to only deal with legislation that had enough votes to pass it with Republican votes. And they didn't want Democrats to be involved, and they're still that way. Even though Hastert's in prison, they still follow the Hastert rule. As a result of that, in the dead of night last week, the Republicans in the House, and I mean the dead of the night, remember the House had been taken over by the House Democrats because they were upset about what had not been done with guns. The event was interrupted for probably less than a minute when the House called to back into session the House, and they passed with no discussion whatsoever the conference report dealing with Zika. Well, as could only be understood by understanding what the Hastert rule is, here's what they did. They had to get all the crazies over there. I'm sorry to use that term. That's a term that Speaker Boehner used, and I think the more I see of this, I think he had it down pretty pat. They did everything they could to go after all the pet projects, Republicans. They hate Planned Parenthood. They hate it, even though millions of Americans get their care there. This Zika, young women are concerned about birth control. This is, for a majority of young women, this is the only place they have to go. But what did they do? They said, we're going to restrict funding for birth control provided by Planned Parenthood. Why would they do that? Only to get votes from the crazies over there. It exempts pesticide spraying from clean water. Mr. President, what we need to do with these mosquitoes, in addition to inventing vaccines and other medicines to fight this plague, we also have to kill the mosquitoes. And we do that by spraying. That works better than anything else. But, of course, the Republicans, hating environmental laws, went after the Clean Water Act, which has been in existence for decades. And just to make sure that they covered all their bases, they whacked veterans funding by $500 million below the Senate bill. And those are for processing claims of veterans. What do we hear complaints about? Processing claims. Well, they took care of that. They want to cut $500 million from Secretary McDonald's budget so he can't process claims very quickly. Cuts Ebola funding by $107 million. Rescinds $543 million from Obamacare. And just for good measure, Mr. President, I guess they had to make sure they had all the Southern votes. They said, what we're going to do now is strike a prohibition on displaying the Confederate flag. So now, if they got their way, you could fly Confederate flags on any military cemetery you wanted. And of course, it sets a terrible precedent by offsetting emergency spending with offsets like Obamacare, cutting Ebola money. So, Mr. President, we did the right thing. All the press, he might find a headline someplace on some right-wing blog, but the fact is that the Republicans know that they failed on funding Zika. And all the press indicates that's the case.